Boom, let's do it. We are going to get into all the Hungry for Wisdom stuff, all the good stuff, the discipleship materials today. In fact, today I'm going to introduce you to one of the coolest documents in all of history. But first, we've got a big announcement. That was too quiet. See? This is why I restart things sometimes, but I'm not going to now because like once is my limit. So let's try this again. We have a big announcement. Here we go. Closer. So we are starting a podcast network. In fact, we just did start a podcast network. What happened was, let me give you some background for those of you that aren't a part of our church here. Hungry for Wisdom is a ministry that sprung out of Grace and Truth Community in West Richland, and I'll tell you the story another time about how the whole thing got started. It was a lot of fun, cool story. Anyway, we've been going for a couple of years now, and through different iterations of it and so on, and it's kind of like it turns out helpful for people on a discipleship level, just to kind of stay connected with Christ and Bible study and keeping their mind on things above and everything. Don't mind me, I'm just waving at people that are walking by here. And so it's been helpful for them, it turns out, because if it wasn't, we were just going to scrap it, right? But we said, okay, we'll keep it going. Well, then other people started showing up like, oh, hey, I just started a podcast. And it's like, cool, like how can we help? And then other people were like, man, I think I want to start a podcast. And I'm like, cool, how can I help? And I'm like throwing gear at them and stuff like that. And producer Tim is going around helping people get started and launch their podcast. So anyway, we wound up with 5 podcasts coming out of this church. And so anyway, I pulled all the hosts together and I said, guys, do you want to just start a network? Like we can combine some forces, centralize some of the, some of the administration and the button clicking and the data entry and stuff. And that way the content guys can just focus more on the content, because that's, if you're good at making disciples, we just want you to focus on making disciples. The rest of it, maybe we can handle in a streamlined way. So everybody was like, I like it, let's roll. And then I said, okay, so what do we call the network, right? We can be on each other's shows and stuff, and we're already doing some of that. And so I said, what do we call the network? And nobody said anything. So I said, guys, is it okay if we just call it the Hungry for Wisdom Network? And it's not because like I want to grow our brand or anything like that. It's just I've got enough like logos and email addresses in my life to keep up with, and I'd love to not have one more. So I was like, what if we just take what we already got and just staple it on there? And everybody was like, cool, I dig it. So here's what it's going to look like, guys. You can see it now. If you go to hfw.network, you'll see the website, and there's a couple of places where we're going to plug in information as we go, some blank spots there. But I mean, basically all 5 of our shows and more, if we add them later, will be accessible there, and then you can just click there and go to all the platforms, the Spotifys and the YouTubes and the Apple Podcasts and the Stitchers and the whatevers, right? But you can see it all. So we got Hungry for Wisdom. We got this show here. We've got Practical Discipleship with Austin and Cheyenne. You guys have seen them. You know them. You love them. And you should. Go check out the Practical Discipleship podcast. We got Laura, who has just started her excellent show, Teach the Children, which is just equipping homeschool families to teach the children, to do our jobs. We got my homie Boris starting one up in Spanish, and then my homie Yin starting one up in Chinese. So for anybody who speaks Mandarin, if you got a Chinese coworker and they're a Christian, or you want them to know more about Bible study, about the Bible, but you want it in their heart language, you'll be able to send them over to Yin's podcast. So anyway, we're gonna do a lot of it's all fun stuff. We're all in town together. It's like we'll be on each other's shows. You guys will meet all these people that you haven't yet on this show, and then you can go and check out theirs. The Mandarin one, some of you might have a little trouble understanding it, but it's okay. Me and Yin are gonna get together on here and kick around some, I don't know what, Watchman Nee theology or something. So then we're just gonna be able to click to link to each other's shows in our descriptions and stuff like that. So it's just kind of combining forces, and it's fun. Like it's just there's no real benefit to it, like business wise necessarily. It's not like we're like, hey, we're gonna make a bunch of money. We actually haven't pursued any monetization, but whatever. If we wanted to at some point, we could go down that road. Right now we're just like, yeah, whatever, let's make disciples, and if somebody comes to us, then we'll deal with it when we get there. So anyhow, Hungry for Wisdom Podcast Network, hfw.network. You can go check out the other shows. A couple of them are about to launch their first episode, so they're like fresh, man. They're like spank that bottom, brand new, and it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun to watch all of these guys kind of come into their own the same way that we've gotten to here. All right, let us, I like this part. That part makes me happy. Let us get into some stuff. I'm going to do Proverbs 10. We're going to start today. We started this show in Proverbs 1, verse 1. And now after however long it's been, we're in Proverbs 10. Can you dig it? I can too. Okay, Proverbs 10:1 says this. The Proverbs of Solomon. A wise son makes his father glad, but a foolish son is a grief to his mother. All right, so here's something I want us to notice about Proverbs 10:1. First off, it says a wise son makes his father glad. It does not say that a successful son makes his father glad. It does not say that a rich son or a prosperous son or a popular son or a well-behaved son makes his father glad. Those things might all be reasons for, a smile and a pat on the back in their place, but it says a wise son makes his father glad. So this is what lights up a father's face, right? So when wisdom is talked about in the book of Proverbs, and you guys know this if you've been listening to this show for longer than 13 minutes, right? Wait, what is it? 6 minutes. For longer than 6.5 minutes. If you've done more than one episode of this show, then you know this. When Proverbs is talking about wisdom, it's not talking about smarts, right? It's talking about skillful living under the hand of the Lord. Skillful living in the fear of the Lord. And so if somebody can live skillfully in the fear of the Lord, that makes their father glad. The Apostle John says this in 3 John. He says, my little children, I have no greater joy than to know that my children are walking in truth. It's wisdom, man. And that makes a father glad. So now flip it. If a wise son makes a father glad, then the second half of the verse says that a foolish son brings sorrow. And not just to both parents, but specifically to the mother. Now, this is a Hebrew parallelism, right? It's going to mention the father and the mother to include the whole, but it mentions mother for a reason, because mama's opinion matters on this, and mom spends more FaceTime with the kids, and things like that. So when there's a foolish child, I suspect that it hits mom a little bit harder, like that sense of failure that parents feel when our kids aren't doing well or whatever. Even if it's not reasonable, we're going to feel that. And I think that probably hits mom harder than it hits dad in some ways, because she spent more FaceTime with him, in the rocking chair and in childhood, and while dad's off at work, and especially the homeschool moms, and things like that. So a foolish son brings sorrow to his mother, and the word that is used for sorrow is an extreme word. It's a superlative word. It's tuga, and it means it's like a how did I write this? A deep anguish, an emotional torment, right? So wisdom brings joy, foolishness brings pain, and that's not just theoretical. It's personal, right? It hurts. It's not that it brings bad results and everybody goes, oh, that's unfortunate. No, it's the kind of thing that gives you like a sanctified headache. You know what I mean? It brings actual pain. So Proverbs is full of this kind of dynamic. It's choices with ripple effects, and those effects ripple into our relationships. So our wisdom, our foolishness, it's never just about us, right? We are contagious beings. We spread. And if we're bringing wisdom or foolishness to the table, that's going to have an effect on the people around us. And so you know what? I'm going to hang on to that phrase. We are contagious beings. It's true. What you do affects other people. Okay, so what do we do with all this? Well, first off, there's different characters here, right? There's the kid, the son. There's the mom, there's the dad. Well, there's also God involved in this, because we're talking about skillful living in the fear of the Lord, under the sovereign hand of God, right? So he's involved in all of these things. And so if you're a parent, this is just something to know. You can't control the outcome, right? But you can control what target you're shooting at. And it is better to train your kid with a focus on wisdom than it is to train your kid with a focus on obedience or compliance. Those are good. Those are important. But what your kid needs is wisdom, right? More than any of that. It doesn't say that a child with good math scores makes a father glad. Now, that's a good thing. I like it when my kids score well on their tests. But what brings me deep and abiding joy is when I see wisdom coming out of my kids, right? So there are things that feel so urgent right now, but they're not as important as teaching a kid to be wise. So if you're a parent, it's just a matter of perspective, right? It's we're shooting here, and the rest of this stuff is going to have to catch up. And even if it doesn't, as long as we got that, we're going to be, kind of okay. If my kid struggles in school, my kid struggles in sports, my kid struggles in social interactions, okay, great. That's all stuff to work on as a parent. But we want to train our kids towards wisdom, because that is what will ultimately pay off, not just in terms of personal satisfaction, but in terms of them being whole and helpful and contributing and faithful adults in society and before the Lord. Now, if we're kids, then if we're being raised by somebody, if you're listening to this and you're a teenager or something, and it's like, okay, well, what does wisdom look like for me? Well, it looks like reverence, like in a lot of ways. Reverence, to revere people who are above you, right? Even if they're wrong, by the way, to respect the position, even if the person holding the position is incorrect about something. There's wisdom in that. There's self-control in that. There's a temperance to that. There's a maturity to that. And if you can give honor where honor is due, then you will really be wise beyond your years. So the goal is wisdom. Something that's helpful for me and has been for a long time. I don't know if I got this advice from somebody or what. Yeah, I did. I got this advice from somebody when I was a youngster. I was like a preteen or something. He said, imagine your 70-year-old self looking back at this moment. Are you going to be embarrassed? And it's really weird, because though I don't have the wisdom that I will have when I'm 70, somehow I can kind of tap into it preemptively, right? Like, I can imagine a 70-year-old me looking back at this moment and saying, like, either, yeah, that was, I used to run a podcast. That was fun, and I think it was helpful. Like, I would see my 70-year-old me saying that. I might be wrong about it, but it's a reasonable guess. If I'm robbing a liquor store, I can't imagine my 70-year-old self being like, that was a very good decision, right? So he said you can borrow wisdom from your future self. So imagine yourself later looking back on this moment. Is there a reasonable expectation that you will give your younger self a pat on the back, right? You can act in wisdom now that you don't even have, just by kind of projecting what older, wiser people think about this moment. You can borrow wisdom from a hypothetical future. And that's been really helpful for me, right? Because sometimes it like increases my discernment. Like, okay, if I'm about to do something or respond in a certain way or whatever, I can just think hypothetically about older me looking back on this. Actually, I'll tell you the reason that this is the reason I've never gotten a tattoo, right? Well, there's two reasons. Number one, like, I'm not one of those guys that's theologically opposed to it. I don't think Leviticus 19 is like prohibiting all tattoos. But the one reason I haven't gotten it is because I'm 38 now, and I'm like, that's too old to start. Like, at some point, if my son wants to get a tattoo with me, like we're on some trip to Israel and it's like, Dad, let's get a commemorative tattoo, I might be like, okay. But it's not going to be like something prominent, like on my face or something. But I saw a guy tattoo his gums once. Like, what? Can you do that? Anyhow, other than like extenuating circumstances, I'm kind of too old to get started. If I start doing a tattoo thing right now, it's just going to be like the 60-year-old youth pastor that's wearing torn up skinny jeans with a faux hawk. It's like, dude, you're not young anymore. Let it go. You got some gray in your beard and it's okay. So that's one reason. I just missed the boat on that, and I'm kind of fine with it. But the other reason is I can't picture a 70 or 80-year-old me looking at the Tweety bird on my shoulder and being like, I'm really glad I did that. I mean, if you're in the Navy, you're in the Marines, and you got, there's some like tradition behind it. I understand that can be cool when you're older. It's tough for me to see. So anyway, the point is, if you're a kid, you can live wisely, make your father glad by making your future self, when you are a father or a mother or whatever, glad. Also, though, I want you to know this. When you live with wisdom, that makes your heavenly Father glad as well. God smiles on you. Now, it doesn't mean he loves you more when you're behaving than he does when you're misbehaving. It's nothing like that. It's got nothing to do with the affection that he has for you, but he can be pleased with you or displeased with you in any given moment. And when you act with wisdom, that is something that your heavenly Father, God, looks at and just goes, yeah. He high-fives that. He approves. He likes it. And if you have an option to make God happy or not, why wouldn't you choose to make God happy, right? So follow Christ, live in wisdom. Okay, here's the deal, guys. I am going to, rather than taking Q&As today, I'm going to introduce you guys to one of the coolest things in all of church history. This is a document, and it's a long one, so I'm not going to read it to you. I'm just going to read you excerpts. It's a document called, it's sometimes called an apology, meaning a defense, not like oh, I'm so sorry, but like a defense of something. So it's the 1 Peter 3:15 thing, right? Like, be ready to give a defense for the hope that lies within you. And apologia is the word where we get apology. It's a statement of why you did what you did, or why you do what you do. So apology didn't originally mean I'm sorry. It meant an explanation of why you be the way you be. And so this is called an apology, right? Christian apologetics is a defense of the faith. This is why we are who we are. So it's sometimes called an apology. More commonly, you can look it up as a plea for the Christians by a guy named Athenagoras. Now, whatever his real name was. We call him Athenagoras, and he was a philosopher, and this was written, we estimate right around 176 AD. So it's, let's say 76 years after the Apostle John died. So it's very, very early Christianity. And what it is a letter of explanation and request from a Christian philosopher to the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. All right. And what he's saying here is, Marcus Aurelius, you're persecuting us, and I can't for the life of me figure out why. Why would you hate us? And so he writes this letter to say, I don't know that you really understand Christianity. Let me explain it to you, and you'll see that it's not reasonable to persecute Christians. So who is Marcus Aurelius? Well, he was, he was the Roman emperor, and his son Commodus was kind of a dingbat. Marcus Aurelius was a philosopher king, right? He was a guy who would govern kind of because he had to, and honestly, he liked the power. But he really loved to spend his time being a philosopher, swinging in a hammock and writing things. And he was a Stoic philosopher. So Marcus Aurelius wrote his most famous publication is called Meditations. And, there's some really helpful stuff in there. And then there's some stuff that, is kind of like, oh, I'm a Christian, and that's not wise, right? Because there's always going to be some of that when you got pagan philosophers. Actually, if you've ever seen the movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe, then Marcus Aurelius was the emperor in the first scene of that movie, and the son Commodus, killed him and took his throne. That's historical fiction, but it's rooted in history. Like, that scene is kind of how it went down. So anyway, they were sort of co-rulers for a while. It was Marcus Aurelius the emperor and his son, we'll call him a prince, Commodus, and they were sort of both on the stage at the same time. So Marcus Aurelius is known as the wisest man in the Roman Empire. And he was known for his justice, and he was known for his insight and things like that. But he also persecuted the Christians, and he had his reasons for it, right? But Athenagoras is coming in saying, like, look, your reasons are based on misunderstandings. So he'll say things in this letter like, Dear Emperor, and he speaks with respect. He says, if the things you believe about us are true, then fine, kill us all. Exterminate every last one of us. Send us to the lions. But the thing is, the things you believe about us aren't true, which means you should stop killing us all and sending us to the lions. Let me read a couple of things. I'll just start you with parts of the table of contents, right? So there's a bunch of chapters, and each chapter, it's kind of like the Bible. Each chapter is really short, right? But like at the beginning, he says the injustice shown towards Christians. The Christians are not atheists, but acknowledge only one God. Ironically, one of the claims against Christians in the early days was that they were atheists. They were called atheists when they were killed, not because they didn't believe in any God, but because they didn't believe in the Roman gods, right? And so they were anti-theos, anti the gods. And so they had this other God over here, but they're against our gods. They were atheists. And so he says, we're not atheists. We have a God. And you kind of know this, actually, because you being a philosopher, you've read our prophets, you've read the book of Proverbs, you've read our stuff. You know that we are not atheists. And so he says the consequent absurdity of the charge of atheism. That's a fun chapter right there. The philosophers agree with the poets respecting the gods, elevated morality and the Christians. And so he says, we live the way you want your citizens to live. You should appreciate us as citizens because we work hard for the good of the nation where we have been sent into exile, right? Like, we belong in heaven, but we're here, and our job is to serve you. Like, you should like us. So check some of this out. He says here, injustice shown towards the Christians. This is at the beginning. This is in chapter 1 of A Plea for the Christians by Athenagoras. He says, the Egyptians reckon among their gods even cats and crocodiles and serpents and asps and dogs. And to all these, both you and the laws give permission to act, deeming on the one hand that to believe in no God at all is impious and wicked, and on the other hand that it is necessary for each man to worship the gods that he prefers, in order that through fear of that deity, men may be kept from doing wrong. In other words, religion brings morality, right? He's saying, you believe, Marcus Aurelius, that if somebody has a religion, they're more likely to live by a moral code, so you promote people practicing religions that are not your religion, right? And he gives these examples. But why? For do not like the multitude be led astray by hearsay. Why is a mere name odious to you? Meaning the name Christian, right? With admiration of your mildness and gentleness and your peaceful and benevolent disposition towards every man, Individuals live in possession of equal rights, and the cities, according to their rank, share in equal honor. And the whole empire, under your intelligent sway, enjoys profound peace. But for us who are called Christians, you have not in like manner you have not in like manner cared. But although we commit no wrong, nay, as will appear in the sequel of this discourse, are all men most piously and righteously disposed towards the deity and towards your government, you allow us to be harassed and plundered and persecuted, the multitude making war upon us for our name alone. Right? So he says the things you appreciate about religion in general, we're actually the best examples of it. We're actually the exemplars of it. But because there's this word Christian that throws you off, you start killing us. What's up with that? So he's using logic, right? Okay, so then there are claims that they are, what did he say? He says, I'm going to address the three claims against us. Number one, that we have, well, that's somewhere in there. He says, claim number one is that we have, what did he call it? Oedipus, I guess is claim number three. We have Oedipian feasts, or Oedipian orgies, which means that, we have freak fests that are, I guess as Diddy would call them, freak-offs between family members. And that is yucky. And so he says, I'm going to answer this. And then he says, and then there's charges of cannibalism. And then there's charges of all this, impious behavior. And so anyway, he just goes through systematically and deals with all this. Claim to be treated as others when we are accused. He says, for it does not comport with your justice that others, when charged with crimes, should not be punished until they are convicted. But that in our case, the name we bear should have more force than the evidence adduced on the trial. When the judges, instead of inquiring whether the person arraigned have committed any crime, vent their insults on the name as if itself were a crime. For no Christian is a bad man unless he falsely professes our doctrines. He says the only bad Christians are the heretics. And so if you find a bad Christian, that's a really good way to know he's not actually a Christian because he's a bad dude. He's like, we got a moral code and we stick to it, man. So what he's saying is there is a serious argument to be made by our holiness, right? Our conduct speaks for itself, and it should carry weight in court because this is your own criteria. Okay, here we go. The three charges are atheism, Theistian feasts, which is eating our own children, and then Oedipian intercourse. So, keep it in the family freak-offs. So anyway, he just goes through and answers these things. Let me read you some more excerpts from this. This is that the Christians are not atheists, but acknowledge only one God. He says, but to us who distinguish God from matter and teach that matter is one thing and God another, and that they are separated by a wide interval, for that the deity is uncreated and eternal, to be beheld by the understanding and reason alone, while matter is created and perishable. Is it not absurd to apply the name atheism? In other words, it's crazy to call us atheists. We have an entire doctrine, a very well-formed and well-articulated doctrine of who God is. We can't be atheists when we're the ones who are explaining what God is like. He says, poets and philosophers have not been voted atheists for inquiring concerning God. He says, there are people who have actually denied the existence of a God and questioned whether there is any such thing as a God at all, and you don't call them atheists. Why? Why us? So what he's doing here is he's saying he's giving rock solid logic as to why the persecution should stop. Let me read you a couple other things. The superiority of the Christian doctrine respecting God. So here, not only does he write to the emperor to say, please stop persecuting us, he's actually going to argue he's going to try and argue Marcus Aurelius into becoming a Christian, right? He's going to say, our doctrine's better than the pagan doctrine of God. Check this out. He says, since therefore the unity of the deity is confessed by almost all, even against their will, I'll get to that one in a second. When they come to treat of the first principles of the universe, and we in our turn likewise assert that he who arranged this universe is God, why is it that they can say and write with impunity what they please concerning the deity, but that against us a law lies in force, though we are able to demonstrate what we apprehend and justly believe, namely that there is one God, with proofs and reason accordant with truth. He's saying what we're saying is perfectly reasonable, and we can hang in the intellectual arena, but you're not letting us compete in the intellectual arena, and there's no good reason for it. So I want to go back to this statement here where he says, when they come to treat of the first principles of the universe, and we in our turn likewise assert that he who arranged this universe is God. Why is it? Nope, I'm sorry. I read the wrong part. Back up. Since, therefore, the unity of the deity is confessed by almost all, even against their will, when they come to treat of first principles. What does that mean? It means a lot of people will end up saying there's one God, whether they mean to or not. All right. So it's a widely known fact that Socrates was something of a monotheist. And it's not that he didn't believe it. He showed, I'll put it this way. Socrates showed a common, decent, at the time, decent and civil respect for the gods of Greece, for, Athena and for Hermes and so on, right? So he said, Hermes? Was he? No, he was a Roman. Let's go with Hercules. I know he was Greek. So anyway, he showed a respect for them, but he seemed to believe in one supreme creator being. So Socrates, the great Socrates, was something of a monotheist. Plato sort of thought his way into there being one creator of the universe as well. So Plato sort of ended up being a monotheist in many ways. And then you've got Marcus Aurelius himself. So I'm preparing for this podcast episode, which, contrary to popular belief, I do occasionally do. Not obviously a whole lot, but for this one, I was like, I just want to get my head around this. So I'm just sitting here reading. I grabbed my copy of Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, and I'm flipping through it, and I'm just doing some reading. I'm doing some skimming. I'm just kind of dipping my toe in various parts of the pond, and I come across this little nugget. Check this out. This is about a paragraph long, and the juicy part shows up at the end. So here's Marcus Aurelius's, philosophy. He says, "Upon every action that thou art about, put this question to thyself: how will this, when it is done, agree with me?" What he's saying there is borrow wisdom from your future self. Ask your 70, 80-year-old self if you're going to be glad you got that tattoo, right? So this is just kind of good street level wisdom. He says, ask before you do it, will this later agree with me? Shall I have no occasion to repent of it? Am I doing something that can't be undone? Yet a very little while, and I am dead and gone, and all things are at end. What then do I care for more than this? That my present action, whatsoever it may be the proper action of one that is reasonable, whose end is the common good, who in all things is ruled and governed by the same law of right and reason, by which God himself is. So I'm just reading through this, just kind of a random snippet from Marcus Aurelius, and I'm like, wait a second, did he just say God himself? Did he just talk like a monotheist? And then I go back to reading a plea for the Christians from Athenagoras, and I'm like, but he's killing people for being monotheists and calling them atheists. And now I'm just mad at Marcus Aurelius. Now I'm like, you hypocrite, what are you doing? And so Athenagoras, being a apparently trained philosopher, he probably would have read that. And he sees stuff like, I don't know, maybe Marcus Aurelius didn't write that yet. But the point is, he's poking holes in Aurelius's logic and saying, look, let me appeal to you as a philosopher. This is crazy and you kind of know it. So he sort of drops this hint in there that even the pagans, even the people that believe in the multiple gods, they're going to start talking like monotheists sometimes and they can't even help it. I cite page 55, right? Okay, here's another one. This one's funny. He says, if there were from the beginning two or more gods, they were either in one and the same place or each of them separately in his own, in his own place, right? In one and the same place, they could not be. For if they are gods, they are not alike. But because they are uncreated, they are unalike. For created things are like their patterns, but the uncreated are unlike, being neither produced from anyone nor formed after the pattern of anyone. What he's saying there is, if you have multiple gods and they're anything alike, they must have drawn that similarity from a common source, which means there's a bigger God above them anyway. So even if you're a polytheist, even if you believe in many different gods, if you're going to say that they are like in any way, you're actually kind of asserting that there's a creator of them, and you should just skip this whole layer of demigods, of little g gods, and just go to that one creator. And what he's saying here is, we know the creator, right? Like, just skip that lower level nonsense and just come where we are and we'll show you the. This is the same thing that Paul says in Athens, which is funny that this guy's name is Athenagoras because it's a callback to Athens and the agora, the marketplace, where Paul was preaching in the Areopagus, right? In Athens. And so he's a convert of that line of thinking. So what he's saying here is your gods, you don't actually believe what you believe. If you believe that there's multiple gods, you kind of believe that there's one God because they have to have a common source. And if they didn't have a common source, they would be completely unlike each other because they would not be according to any similar pattern. But if there's similarities, there's a pattern. A pattern by definition cannot be random. It must have come from somewhere, and that somewhere must be the God that we're talking about. So come with me and just worship a real God, because you look ridiculous bowing down to a block of wood, in Isaiah 44 terms. Then he says this, and this is for, just not for nothing. This is just kind of like crazy that he said this. He says, "For if the world, being made spherical, is confined within the circles of heaven, and the creator of the world is above the things created, managing that by his providential care of these, what place is there for a second God, or for other gods? For he is not in the world, because it belongs to the other, nor about the world, for God, the maker of the world, is above it. But if he is neither in the world nor about the world, or around it, for all that surrounds it is occupied by this one, then where is he? Is he above the world and the first God, in another world, or about another? But if he is in another or about another, then he is not about us. For he does not govern the world, nor is his power great, for he exists in a circumscribed space." So anyway, what he's saying is you have reasoned yourself into a monotheistic creator God that created all these other gods that you worship, and one that either has everything to do with us and we should submit to him, or has nothing to do with us and we should just ignore the whole panoply of gods anyway. Just like let it all go. In other words, what he's saying is either be a Christian or just be an actual atheist. Like those are your only two intellectually consistent options. And this is just rock solid logic, man. It's crazy. But the interesting part to me is that he's at the beginning of this argument, he says, "For if the world being made spherical is combined in the circles of heaven," and I saw that and I'm like, why did I not see this when I was in public school and people were telling me that Christians have always been flat earthers? I got a Christian here who was probably alive at the time of the Apostle John, which is pretty early, and he says the world is spherical, not flat. So can we please take this flat earth stuff and just staple that to a couple of knuckleheads in the Middle Ages and, that didn't quite make it into the Renaissance, and then just like hang that around their neck, and let's go back to saying what Isaiah said and what Job said, that the earth is spherical and is set on its pillars, which is obviously poetic, but even the earliest Christians believed that the earth is round, not flat. Okay. Then he goes on to say, look, you've read our prophets. You know that we're being consistent with the prophets. So if you're going to persecute Christians, you also have to persecute the Jews. And I don't think you want to do that, Marcus Aurelius. It's a pretty common practice, but he wasn't into that too much. So anyway, he was basically just pushing him to the limits of his own thinking. Last one for today, and then I'll kind of do a part 2 on this because he really gets into some fascinating arguments later on. But he says here, he talks about one God, by whom the universe has been created through his logos and set in order and is kept in being. I have sufficiently demonstrated. And I say his logos, for we acknowledge also a son of God. Whoa. He's quoting John chapter 1. Let me read you. Where'd my Bible go? Over here. Look. I'm going to read you John chapter 1, okay? Many of you know this, some of you don't, and you're about to have your mind blown. John 1:1. I'm going to substitute a Greek word here, right? It says in English, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men." Now, it says, in the beginning was the Word. That Greek word for word is logos, right? Which is, it means word. It also means communication. It's the word where we get logic. It means the reason or the reasoning mechanism or the wisdom and, things like that. So in the beginning was the logos, and the logos was with God, and the logos was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, through the logos. And without him was not anything made that was made. And in him, in the logos, was life, and the life was the light of men. So this Greek-speaking philosopher is quoting John chapter 1 shortly after it was written in 176 AD, which tells you that this was not some later addition to the canon. Then he says, "But if, in your surpassing intelligence, it occurs to you to inquire what is meant by son," when I say that God has a son and he is the Logos, he says, if you want to ask, what do I mean by that? I will state briefly that he is the first product of the Father, not as having been brought into existence from the beginning. He is the first product of the Father, not as having been brought into existence. For from the beginning, God, who is eternal mind, had the Logos in himself, being from eternity, instinct with Logos. but inasmuch as he came forth to be the idea and energizing power of all material things, which lay like a nature without attributes, and in inactive earth, the grosser particles being mixed up with the lighter. What he's saying here is this Logos, this Jesus who proceeds from God eternally, is the one who created everything and set it all in order. I submit to you a writing of the Apostle Paul from Colossians chapter 1. Starting in verse 15, he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things. And in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. And he is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. So, before 200 AD even hits, Athenagoras has a deep and soundly Christian and Protestant Christology, right? So when we call out to Jesus the way we do, we're not making these ideas up, right? This is ancient truth. And by the way, let me just bring in an apologetics piece here, since we're reading a great apologist. Anybody who tells you that the deity of Christ and the eternality of Christ was a later development, or that like Constantine came in and was like, Jesus is God, that's the way it is. And then they changed all of their Bibles and the conspiracy theories start and YouTube gets clicks, right? They changed all of the Bibles and they took out everything that the Gnostics wrote, but that's the real Christianity, man. And this is like the white man's power grab Bible. No, forget that. We got a straight line of transmission from the Apostle John to the Apostle Paul to Athenagoras and all the other apostolic fathers that were with him, right? You got Polycarp, you got Ignatius of Antioch, you got Melito of Sardis, you got all of these guys who have a New Testament Christology that is exactly the one that we have now. And then you get to Athanasius in the time of Constantine and so on. But Constantine didn't say anything new, right? He actually said very little himself. But the Christians in the time of Constantine were quoting people that came before them, all the way back to the New Testament. And so what we have here is a trail of breadcrumbs. It's not even breadcrumbs, a trail of bread loaves that say, here's our Christology down through the centuries. It started with Jesus himself, then his apostles, then his apostolic fathers, and his apologists like Athenagoras and Justin Martyr and these guys. And then into the early church fathers, in the 300-400s, and then into the Middle Ages, and then into the Renaissance, and then into the Reformation, and then into, the First Great Awakening and the Second Great Awakening. Every era of church history, right down to, what's the day that I'm recording this? May 29th, 2025, has a consistent Christology, right? There are some elements that it has taken us a little bit of time to figure out how to articulate. Like the term Trinity wasn't around yet when Athenagoras wrote this, right? Because that came around in the 200s with Tertullian. So we've developed some of our terminology over time, but all of the concepts we can trace right back to the beginning. So the deity of Christ and the Trinity and the eternality of Jesus, the preeminence of Christ, the fact that Jesus is of equal glory with the Father, equal power, equal status, even while he submits to him, that he is co-equal with the Father. All of this goes straight back to the beginning, back to Jesus himself. Just check John 5:23 if you want to know what I mean. You take John 5:23, you take what you hear at Grace and Truth on a typical Sunday morning, they're going to be the same thing, and then you're going to be able to make a paper trail inside, and every one of them inside of the lifetime of the guy that wrote before him, and there's an unbroken chain of a testimony of who Christ is from the Christians. Okay, so I will stop that there as far as the meditations or the plea to Marcus Aurelius and his meditations and all that kind of stuff. We're going to do a little bit of a shorter episode today just because, frankly, I didn't put any this isn't that or Q&As on this one because, that was some heavy stuff. So like it, subscribe it, and, send it out to somebody that you think might be interested in it. And by the way, let me just have you think about it this way. What if there was a way for you to spread biblical doctrine and worldview training and things like that for absolutely nothing? If you could do it for free. Well, it turns out you can, because when you do a like and subscribe and a share and a comment and all that, that's actually what that does. It ends up pushing this out to more people, and it costs you nothing. So it's one way to just kind of hop on and participate in the spread of the Great Commission. So it helps out the channel. whatever. Like I said at the beginning, we're not really trying to grow our brand. It's just, we do this in order to help people. So if you want to help more people through this, bam, that's the way you can do it. Like it, subscribe it. You can text in your questions to 509-867-0070 and check out hfw.network because, hey, we just started a podcast network because why not? It is the wild, wild west. So until I see you guys again, Jesus deserves disciples. Go be one.
Hungry for Wisdom is a ministry of Grace and Truth Community in West Richland, Washington. 1 John 4:19. We love him because he first loved us. If you are enjoying Hungry for Wisdom, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share it. Leave us a 5-star rating if you think we've earned it.